Sally Field isn't just another Hollywood star. She's the kind of actress whose name defines an era. 2 Academy Awards, 3 Emmys, unforgettable roles in movies like Forrest Gump and Steel Magnolias. But the truth is, behind the spotlight, there's a side of her story that almost nobody knows. And for decades, she refused to talk about it. Why? Because it involved a man who wasn't just adored by audiences, he was adored by her. A man she admired, feared, respected, and maybe even loved. Hey, if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, don't forget to click subscribe. It's completely free, and this way you won't miss any of our next stories from the stars you grew up with. Loved. That man was James Garner. Sally's life began like something out of a Hollywood script. Born in 1946 in Pasadena, California, she grew up surrounded by stars. Her mother was an actress, her stepfather a stuntman who doubled for some of the biggest names in Hollywood. On the outside, it looked glamorous, but for Sally, it was complicated. She was shy, insecure, a girl who felt out of place everywhere, except when she was performing. Acting gave her a voice, a way to be seen. And yet, when her first big break came, it wasn't the serious career she dreamed of. It was Gidget, a bubbly sitcom about a surfing teenager. Overnight, she was America's sweetheart. Fans adored her smile. Studios saw dollar signs. But Sally? She felt trapped. Then came The Flying Nun. And yes, the show made her famous, but it also made her miserable. Imagine being taken seriously when your character literally flies around in a habit. Directors laughed, critics rolled their eyes, and Sally? She started to believe the whispers that she'd never be more than the cute girl on TV. But here's the twist. That frustration didn't break her, it fueled her. And when the world least expected it, Sally shocked everyone. Determined to prove she was more than a gimmick, Sally walked straight into the lion's den, the actor's studio. This wasn't Hollywood fluff. This was the school where legends like Al Pacino and Robert De Niro sharpened their craft. And under the eye of Lee Strasberg, one of the toughest teachers in the business, Sally tore herself down and rebuilt from scratch. The turning point? Sybil in 1976, a role so dark, so demanding it nearly consumed her. Sally played a young woman with multiple personalities, each more disturbing than the last. Producers doubted she could handle it. Critics expected her to fail. But when the cameras rolled, Sally delivered one of the rawest, most haunting performances television had ever seen. It was shocking, uncomfortable, unforgettable, and it won her an Emmy. Overnight, the Flying Nun was gone. In her place stood a force of nature, and as an actress who could outact almost anyone in the room. And here's where the story gets interesting. Because it was during this rise, when she was finally being taken seriously, that Sally crossed paths with a man who didn't just change her career, he changed her life. James Garner, picture this. You're a young actress who's just clawed her way out of being typecast. You've gone from sitcom fluff to Emmy-winning powerhouse. You finally feel like you belong in the big leagues, and then you walk onto a set, and standing in front of you is James Garner. Not just any actor, the James Garner. Hollywood's golden boy, rugged, magnetic, effortlessly cool. The kind of man who could silence a room without saying a word. Sally remembers that moment like it was yesterday. She was nervous, almost terrified. Here was this icon she'd grown up watching, now suddenly her co-star. She didn't want to mess it up. She didn't want to look small in front of him. But then something unexpected happened. Garner noticed her fear, and instead of letting it crush her, he reached across that invisible wall with something simple but powerful. Kindness. He had this uncanny ability to make people feel safe. No ego, no arrogance, just this quiet confidence that disarmed everyone. And Sally? She was hooked, not in a romantic sense. Not yet, but in the sense that she knew she was in the presence of someone who wasn't just great at acting, he was great at being human. And that was rare in Hollywood. On screen, James Garner had a rhythm, a timing, a presence that directors called magic. But what most people didn't know was how generous he was behind the scenes. He wasn't the kind of actor who stole the spotlight, he gave it away. If a scene was about you, he'd make sure you shined. If you stumbled, he'd carry you without making it obvious. Sally never forgot that, because in Hollywood, where egos often ran bigger than talent, James Garner was different. He was grounded, humble, always lifting the people around him instead of tearing them down. For Sally, this wasn't just inspiring, it was intoxicating. Watching him work was like watching a masterclass, not just in acting, but in how to live. His calmness under pressure, his instinct for when to push and when to hold back, his ability to make every single person on set feel important. What Sally finally admitted, after keeping quiet for decades, is that her connection with James Garner wasn't just about lights, cameras, and scripts. It was something deeper, something real. She says they laughed together. It's the kind of laughter that comes from knowing someone, not just working with them. They leaned on each other during tough moments, shared frustrations, even clashed when their strong personalities collided. But through all of it, there was this unshakable respect. And here's where the mystery begins. Sally doesn't give every detail. She never says flat out if their relationship crossed the line from friendship into something more. But the way she talks about him, it isn't how you talk about just another co-star. She calls him a man who made me feel seen, valued, respected. Words heavy with emotion. Words that leave you wondering what really happened behind closed doors. Hollywood had its rumors, whispers, questions nobody could answer. And maybe Sally wanted it that way, to protect something private in a world where nothing stays secret for long. But one thing is certain. James Garner left a mark on Sally Field's life that no other man ever could. Most people remember James Garner for his charm, his cool, the roles that made him a star. But Sally? She remembers something else. Something the cameras never captured. She says Garner had a quiet strength, a moral compass that guided everything he did. In an industry filled with egos, scandals, and fake smiles, he stayed grounded. He treated people with respect, whether they were a director, a co-star, or the guy carrying cables on set. That's what made him different. That's what made him unforgettable. And Sally wants people to know his real legacy wasn't just in Hollywood, it was in the way he touched lives, the way he carried himself with grace when everyone else was chasing fame. At 78, when Sally finally broke her silence, her voice cracked with emotion. Because for her, James Garner wasn't just a chapter in her career. He was part of her story. A once-in-a-generation man whose kindness and decency still haunt her to this day. By the time Sally reached her late 70s, she had nothing left to prove. 2 Academy Awards, 3 Emmys, Golden Globes, the Kennedy Center Honor, and in 2023, the Screen Actors Guild gave her the Life Achievement Award, a prize reserved for legends. But instead of basking in glory, Sally chose to rip the curtain back and tell her truth. Her memoir In Pieces wasn't some polished Hollywood fairy tale. It was raw, honest, painful. She wrote about the dark corners of her childhood, the pressure of fame, the mistakes, the heartbreaks, and the moments when she almost broke. Critics didn't just call it brave, they called it shocking. Because Sally didn't hold back. She exposed the insecurities, the self-doubt, and the scars that even fame couldn't heal. And tucked between those stories, careful readers noticed something else. Subtle hints about the people who shaped her most. People like James Garner. Her words left fans wondering, was this memoir her way of preparing us? Of hinting at a truth she'd finally say out loud when the time was right? If Sally's career was dramatic, her personal life was even more layered. She married twice, first to Stephen Craig, then to Alan Greisman. Both marriages ended in divorce, but they gave her 3 sons who would follow creative paths of their own. And then there was Burt Reynolds, the Hollywood romance everyone talked about. Sally and Burt weren't just lovers, they were co-stars in films that defined a generation. But behind the cameras, their love story was complicated, messy, on and off, and endlessly scrutinized by tabloids. Burt himself later admitted that Sally was the one who got away. Yet even with all that public drama, Sally's most meaningful connection might have been the one she never talked about, James Garner. Because unlike her marriages or her romance with Burt, her bond with Garner stayed quiet, hidden, private, almost sacred. It wasn't written into a headline, it wasn't splashed across magazines. And maybe that's what made it so powerful. The unspoken, the unconfirmed, the what if that kept fans guessing for decades. And so, after decades of silence, Sally Field finally spoke. Not as the bubbly teenager from Gidget, not as the Oscar-winning powerhouse from Norma Rae or Places in the Heart, but as a woman at 78, looking back at a lifetime in the spotlight and finally daring to reveal the truth about the man who left the deepest mark on her. James Garner wasn't just a co-star, he wasn't just another Hollywood leading man. To Sally, he was something far greater, the rare soul who treated her with the kind of respect, kindness, and quiet strength that even fame couldn't buy. In a world obsessed with glamour and scandal, maybe the real scandal is this, that Sally Field waited until now to share how deeply he touched her life. And maybe that's why her confession feels so powerful, because it reminds us that behind every Hollywood legend is a very human story. James Garner's films will be remembered forever, but if you listen to Sally, his real legacy isn't on screen. It's in the lives he touched, the people he lifted, and the woman who, after a lifetime of holding back, finally found the courage to say out loud he was unforgettable. And that, in the end, may be the greatest role James Garner ever played.